Test. Okay, I think that works.
Yeah. It's small. Yep. But I don't practice anymore in the city, but I do work closely with some of the city council people around the smoking ordinance and things like that. Yeah, have to sell it. Yeah, it'd be fun. We should have them come back. Yeah, it'd be fun. Hi, everyone. Shay, how are you today?
Good.
Are you a wine drinker? Is that what that is?
Margarita.
Okay. Is there salt on the rim?
Yes.
On the rock? What kind of tequila?
Patron.
Of course. All right. Who drinks Casamigos tequila? With George Clooney. You know, you kind of have a good taste. Yeah, good. All right. How's everybody today? Feeling good? All right. Those of you, it's your first day of class. Somebody has the first day of class. That's you. Anybody else? Oh, well, we had a nice turnout that first day, didn't we? Okay, great. So was everybody able to find Blackboard? Find the course? Find all the hard work OSSA did for you? And did you find the schedule and the syllabus? Did you find the grammar assessment? Yeah, it's in the test and exam section. It's just a PowerPoint that you self-assess. How did you do on that?
It was a self-assessment, so I didn't credit it.
It was a self-assessment. But did it help you? Did you learn that you have some gaps, things you need to think about? Because that's a fairly complex assessment. Yeah? What did you think? We had an English PhD student develop that. Helpful? Yeah, we kind of say, oh, there's a lot to think about here, yeah? Things we typically don't, if we're not in front of us, we typically don't think about it. But look, there's also some grammar resources in Blackboard that I hope you'll take advantage of. Some tips on writing. You can go to Grammar Girl, right? Grammarly, some great websites to help you with that. So I hope you'll take advantage of those. All right, good.
The link to Grammar Girl on Blackboard doesn't work.
It's broken.
Yeah.
All right, I'll try to remember to tell Essay that, or if she comes in, we'll all tell her. But yeah, if you run across any broken links, please let us know. Thank you. All right, so how about the my commitments, the acknowledgments of kind of the expectations for the class? Everybody good there? The attendance policy, everybody understands, right? So we're all good. All right, well that's easy. I think there was a little confusion about the first post. I apologize for that. I view things through a different lens through my iPad, and sometimes what I think is showing up clearly is not, but I think that Osese cleared that up. Did she? Did she send a note? Clear? Maybe I'm confusing it with another class. Anyway, I looked at several of the posts, and they looked good. So those of you that did get it, got it pretty well, right? I just wanted you to talk about critical thinking for the most part, and you did. But if you didn't, or you were that confused about it, please go ahead and I'll have Osese open it back up again. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Okay, I'll have her open it back up again, and you can get that post. Yeah, okay. So we'll do that. Thank you very much for the name tags, and we're good to go. Okay, so listen, regarding the posts, those are to get you up to speed and ready for our discussions in class, right? We don't issue a grade, but they do impact your attendance, so you know. But what I'm looking for there is grammar, punctuation, and logical flow of your thinking. So do yourself a favor and think about what you're going to write before you write it. Now, the last piece is, Sometimes we will direct you to resources, like the reading packet on Blackboard. But if we don't, then remember, we don't have a textbook in this class. So look at the resources on Blackboard, but if there's nothing relevant there for you, feel free to go out on to anything online that you can find. That's part of the objective for this class, is to kind of get you thinking about DIY, which is do it yourself, right? Because when you get into the workplace, somebody's going to say to you, do this, and you got to go do it, and you got to figure out, and you have to be resourceful and creative, and that's what we're looking for in here, okay? All right, good. So having said that, let's talk about critical thinking. Those of you that did post, what did you learn about it? Kayla, it's nice to have you in the class.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Oh, it's good to see you again. You've had a successful summer.
It was a lot of fun.
It was, yeah. Very cool. So, critical thinking. Who wants to start us off? Gunnar?
So what I've learned, like, pretty much is like going through the packets and what we talked about last class, is critical thinking. It's just like, it's a lot of steps, and it's definitely a process that you have to take your time with. And I feel like it's easy to like miss a step and, you know, not get the full impact of thinking critically on certain topics, or thinking about like an object and how to solve a puzzle.
Yeah. Does it take time? Yeah, it does, and that's typically what most of us don't allow to happen when we're looking at a problem. And look, let's think about critical thinking is typically aligned with problem-solving skills. Yeah? But it doesn't have to be. It can also be aligned with creativity. So for instance, if you wanted to create a strategic plan, would you need to think? Yeah, you would need to think. If you wanted to do a gap analysis, what's a gap analysis?
Generally accepted principles.
Yeah, you're thinking of accounting principles. You're thinking of GAPP.
That's GAA.
GAAP, thank you. I'm thinking of GAP, gap. A gap is where we use it every day. We just don't think about it that way. But a gap is, where am I today? Where do I want to be in the next 30 days? What are the steps I need to take in order to fill that gap? Right? So that's a gap analysis. It requires a lot of thinking. It takes self-awareness, which is a lot of emotional intelligence. Did I just go on? No. It takes self-awareness, a lot of emotional intelligence, because that's one of the foundational points of emotional intelligence, self-awareness. So you kind of got to know where you are. But not just self-awareness about your person, but if you're doing a gap analysis for your business, right, you also have to be willing to accept where you are. A lot of people go out of business today because they're not willing to own and be realistic about where their business really is. Okay. So with a gap analysis, you have to think, where am I today? Where do I want to be in 30 days? What do I need to do to fill the gap? It's a very healthy exercise to do. What are other types of strategic thinking programs we get involved with where critical thinking can come into play? Have you taken your marketing classes? What's SWOT analysis? Ishan, what does SWOT stand for? SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Very good. Yeah, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What opportunities do we have out there? And then finally, threats. Who's our threat? Who would normally be a threat? Rose, who would normally be a threat to a business?
The consumers?
A consumer could be, if they stop spending money, right? If they stop coming, that could be a threat. If competition opened up, they might go someplace else, right? That might happen. Could government impose a regulation that might be a threat? Yeah. Could the economy possibly be a threat, generally speaking, around the consumer spending? Yeah. So all of us, you need to be thinking about what those things are. And that's why critical thinking is important, but it's also important when we encounter problems. But what is your goal? We're going to talk more about total quality management later in the semester, and the Ritz-Carlton and the Malcolm Baldrige Award and all of that. But what is our ultimate goal when a problem or challenge arises? Let's put it in the hospitality context. When a customer service challenge arises, what's the key thing we need to do from a thinking perspective so that we don't continue to repeat that problem? Because that's the real problem that leaders want to solve is so mistakes are okay, but if it's the same mistake over and over again, you're not going to last. Does everybody get that? Okay, so Alice, did you have your hand up? Or Ash, who had their hand up? Gunnar had their hand up? Okay, Gunnar.
I feel like the problem is, the question would be, how and why is this problem arising, and what can we do to either replace or fix the problem?
Very good. And so with the how and the why, what are we going to end up with? There's a term of art we're looking for. We're looking for the root cause. Right? How did this happen? Why did this happen? Two really good questions to ask. Hopefully leads us to the root cause. So another way to do that businesses use today, although if they're really thinking about critical thinking, they will ask why 5 times. Right? Why 5 times? So let's come up with a scenario. So who works at a hotel? I don't know. Okay, Eric, where do you work?
I work at the Hotel Derek.
Oh, Derek, you mentioned that. What do you do there?
Front desk.
You work at the front desk. Okay, so a guest comes in and says, hey, I got a reservation. There goes, what's Eric going to say?
Great, what's your name?
There you go. So Eric says, great, what's your name? And I give Eric my name. And Eric comes up and he looks at me and he goes, I don't have a reservation. Right? Okay, so I don't have it in the system. And I'm going, what? No, I've got this reservation and here, I have a confirmation number. Right? And then you look and it looks like your confirmation number. Yeah, number of digits, letter first, whatever it is you guys do, it's your pattern. And you look at your system and you go, man, I'm sorry, it's not here. Do we have a problem?
No.
Why not?
Because if they book through a third party and it's so specifically for Hotel Derek, if they book through like Groupon or Hotels Tonight, those reservations don't automatically sync with our system. And so generally when we get reservations, it comes in as an email and we have to input their reservation manually. If they book their reservation 5 minutes before they walk in the door, we probably won't have had time.
Like Hotel Tonight or something like that?
We probably will not have had time to put their reservation into the system. Therefore, when they show up, oh great, I see you made a reservation. We'll just make a new reservation for you. You send me that confirmation email so I can have that as part of my records that you booked through us. And then we'll put you in a room and we'll be good to go.
I so like that, but it totally screwed up my scenario. Let's come back to that with the third party. But let's say, I think it's a great lesson. Everybody has a lesson on distribution and OTA. That's good stuff. Now, and that tells you if you book late, you say to the front desk person, I just booked, so maybe it hasn't had time to get in your system. Thank you for that. That'll save everybody a lot of pain. And that's a great solution there. But here's the thing. What if I booked it through your reservation system and it didn't show up? Okay, so I'm just trying to create a problem, but you absconded with my problem last time, which was good. That's good thinking. But here we go. So now it doesn't show up in the reservation, right? And so it doesn't show up, and it's supposed to, right? From our PMS, it's supposed to come from Central, and it's supposed to get in our system. Now, you take care of me, just like you did in that previous scenario. You get me a room. If you don't have a room, you guys arrange. You're responsible. You take some responsibility for me, right? You decide to do that. I look nice. I have some credibility. You're like, sure. Okay. But it's all said and done. It's over with. Then you want to ask the question of why, right? Why did this happen? So why? Why could you might not know, so you have to ask why could it have happened?
Somebody could have deleted the reservation. Somebody could have changed one of the details on the reservation so that when I searched for it, it didn't come up.
But why? Why would those things happen?
Why?
Yeah.
Human error, computer error.
Okay. Why? Why would human error? Why would human error happen?
Because people are human and humans err.
Eric, we're going to have a lot of fun this month. Eric, what? Oh, give me. That was so good. Give me a different rational justification. Sure, I get the rhetorical part of human and error, but why could human error occur in the workplace? Training, thank you. I was not sure where you were going to go next. So, yeah, training is perfect. Yes, because and perhaps we didn't hire the right person for the right job. Is that fair? Yeah, and maybe we didn't train them properly, right? And so that's what you're doing. You're looking deeper and deeper and deeper to find the root cause, because you've got to solve the root cause. If you don't solve the root cause, what is more than likely going to happen? It's going to happen again, right? So this asking why 5 times is a really cool decision-making and thinking process that organizations do to get to the bottom of things. And ultimately, you have to do that. It can also be very frustrating. Right, Eric?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, so we understand the need to think critically. And remember, thinking critically is not thinking negatively. It's thinking deeply. It's thinking profoundly. It's looking at things from different perspectives. So let's walk through some of the information you put down on your posts about what thinking critically actually is. Eden, you want to start us off? Speak up a little louder for me. Oh, I like that one. Credibility of the information. How about credibility of the information and or the source where the information came from? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Are you good with that? Okay. Is it important that we assess the credibility of the source of information? Okay. So if you were asked to put together some research around a problem, would you want the source of your information to be highly credible?
Yes.
Because if not, is the research reliable? Okay. So, now, are all sources, do they all have the same credibility level with all people? Okay, but what do we call that? Bias. We call it inherent bias. Very good. Do we all bring inherent bias to the table?
Yes.
Do we all bring unconscious bias to the table?
Yes.
Okay, that's part of self-awareness. Do you bring unconscious bias? Some people bring more than others. You have to know that about yourself when you are assessing a speaker, or a book, or research. If you don't like the professor, or you don't like the school they went to, is that going to impact the way you view their research and their conclusions? If you prefer Fox, I was trying not to be too harsh, but I was going to say Fox News, but that would be an oxymoron. So if you prefer, did you get that? That was funny. You gotta laugh at this. I mean, I work really hard at this stuff, so that's funny. So if you prefer CNN or MSNBC to Fox, if you are watching Fox, you're probably not going to give much credence to Fox. Vice versa. Fair enough, right? But what would a person that really wanted to be informed do?
Watch both.
Watch both. Or read both. Right? Read whatever it is that's out there. Read multiple sources. And then make an assessment on what you know. If you've never listened to 2 or 3 different newscasts from different sources about one particular issue, you're really missing out. And it actually can be quite entertaining to think about how far apart people can be about what allegedly are factual news stories. But I would encourage you to do that. It's actually rather frightening. And then, of course, today the credibility is so important. Why?
Anybody can just make up anything posted on the internet.
You have to really take a moment and think before you share, and ask yourself, Is this from a credible source? Do we have places to go online to check the authenticity of a source? What's the name of one of them? Well, journals you can go to that are refereed, we could do that, but isn't there a website you can go to determine if something is accurate? Snopes is one place you can go to, right? S-N-O-P is. Yeah, you can do that. There's places out there, fact checkers. A lot of people will do that, but then of course you want to fact check the fact checker. It's kind of a never-ending process today. But you had Russia providing a lot of false information on the web, and there are other sources as well. You don't have to go all the way to Russia. We have people in the U.S. that have been doing that. Looks like the last study looks like it was pretty integral in the first Clinton election. And it also happened before that. Are you guys familiar with swift voting? The concept? That's what they call it when somebody takes a false statement and gets it out into the mainstream media and news areas to disseminate. And it happened against, are you familiar with the gentleman named John Kerry? He's been a political figure for quite some time, senator out of Massachusetts, ran for president. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he was running for president, and he was doing pretty well. And then all of a sudden, he was the captain of, I believe this is accurate, the captain of what we call a swift vote in Vietnam. And these people created a false story about him during his leadership time that made him look really bad. And people caught it up, they disseminated it, and it turned out to be totally false. But the damage had already been done because it knocked him out pretty much of the race, right? So you have to remember, sadly, a lie goes halfway around the world before the truth even gets its boots on, right? And so you don't want to be a part of that process. And the way you avoid being part of that process is by thinking critically and assessing the credibility of the source, like Eden taught us. Right. Eden, I'm going to say something real quickly. Please don't take it personally. It just reminds me of something that happened this morning. You're looking at your hair at the ends. So I was driving to work today, to the college, and I just happened to pull up, and this young lady next to me was just totally rocking out in her car next to me. But while she was doing it, she was looking at her hair, and I thought, that is impressive to be able to do both of those things at one time, right? Because she was just didn't have a care in the world and didn't care who looked at her, because I looked at her for quite a while. So you feel your hand up?
Oh, no.
No, okay.
I have something funny to say about that.
Okay.
I know, like, in like Hispanic, like in the, like Mexico or Guatemala or Colombia, they have soap operas. But like that soap opera lasts for an hour, but during that hour they have like 4 different stories.
Oh.
And the reason they do it like that is because they say women are better multitaskers and can keep up with like
All the stories?
All the stories at
Then
the
men
same
are.
time, yeah.
Well, I kind of take that personally. I think that's a little sexist. And guys, how many of you watched soap operas when you were younger or still do? Man, when I was in college, you guys remember Days of Our Lives? Is it still on? Oh my gosh, it's still on. We literally would schedule our classes. 3 of us lived together. We literally would schedule our classes around Days of Our Lives. And we'd run home from our last morning class to be home in time to watch Days of Our Lives. It was like you guys watching The Bachelor today, right? How many of you watch that? Yeah?
It's my dream.
It's your dream. You're going to break up with your boyfriend and go on The Bachelor? I would encourage you to wait until you break up before you go on there. My daughter and her husband watched that show. And I'm like, wow. Really? Speaking of thinking critically, have you ever watched this show Imposters on Netflix? You watch it, Shay? Anybody else? All right, this is a wickedly thought out show. I don't know who came up with this, but this was somebody that was, it's frightening, the thinking that they came up with for this show. The premise is this group of people creates a scenario for a wealthy person to fall in love with a woman. It could be a man or a woman that falls in love with her. But then they get married, and then she takes all their money. And then the gang kind of splits the dough. Is that not dark?
Edgy.
That's edgy? Dude, we gotta talk. That's well past edgy. For me, that's falling off a cliff. But I did watch both seasons. It was interesting. But my point is, look, people are thinking all the time. Think of all the content that's out there today on Netflix and on Amazon Prime. People are thinking, and that's what you've got to be able today. Thinking is what drives success, and that's why we're going to spend time on it in this class, is thinking critically. So it's good. All right, so let's keep going. You started us off with credibility. We have to recognize our inherent bias. We have to recognize external biases, right? Is this news outlet biased? Is this think tank biased? Yeah. Is this resource biased? Got to ask yourself. Sometimes you have to do research on the source to determine if it's credible or objective. Where can you go today to find objective news?
NPR.
NPR. How many of you think NPR provides objective news? Okay, yeah, I kind of see it that way. It doesn't. NPR, National Public Radio. It's publicly funded. Yeah. And that's why we think it's a little more objective, right? What other sources are out there? Think of how about a source in Texas that you can think of that would be relatively objective?
The Texas Standard.
The Standard I'm not familiar with.
I don't know. It's one of the radio programs on NPR.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Let's get outside NPR for a minute. And how about newspaper? Are you familiar with the Texas Tribune?
Yeah.
Texas Tribune is more of a publicly funded. They take donations, and they have good. I find them to be good stories. And then what's the national publication that's affiliated with the Texas Tribune? It is called, and I'm asking because I can't remember, but it is called. Anyway, I'll find it and I'll post it. But it is a fabulous resource for objective reporting, and they typically do longer, deeper pieces. But you can typically count on it. It's going to come in before the class, and so I can feel it. Global. Well, clearly, I need to think more. Okay. But anyway, I want you to think about objective sources because that's really crucial. All right. What are other aspects of critical thinking? Credibility is one. Relevance. Is something relevant? Is it relevant? So, how many of you ever had a conversation with somebody? And for instance, I say to Alice, you didn't do very well on that test yesterday. And then Alice's response is, yeah, well, you didn't write a very good test. Not that Alice would ever do that. But if she said that, is what Alice said to me relevant to the comment I made to her? It's relevant to the fact that we're both talking about the test. But is it relevant to the comment I made to Alice about Alice not performing well on the test? You can argue that, well, if the test was written well, you can argue that. But as a practical matter, if it's just me and Alice that's in a vacuum, and Alice didn't do well, that doesn't really mean the test wasn't well written. If all the class said, dude, it wasn't a very good test, that's different. But if I say to Alice, you didn't do very well on the test, what's up? You see, how many of us would respond in the hypothetical like Alice did in the hypothetical and attack back, right? To try to deflect rather than address the question. Do you see? So you've got to realize that attacking back is not relevant, but we do it. Why? Jimmy, why do people attack back when they feel threatened? Insecure. That's exactly right. We don't have the ability to be vulnerable own our shortcomings, right? Or at least talk about them. And that's a skill you need to develop. That's called well, it's called responsibility for our emotions and our feelings and not being defensiveness and establishing our self-esteem, but it's also about being able to be vulnerable. Is that fair? And if you want to learn more about vulnerability, listen to Brene Brown on TED. I would encourage each of you to do that. Didn't we do that in the class meeting? Yeah, guys, we did that last year. Yeah. And did you find it helpful?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And she has another one about shame. And everybody, we talk about it, she's a professor here at the University of Houston. Most watched TED Talk. And she has a Netflix show now, too. She's really quite remarkable.
And she got interviewed by Oprah.
Oh, she did?
Yes, she did.
Oh, that's great. And I think she's just got the best personality. And she's self-deprecating humor in her talks and things like that. So it's really, really fun to see. So if you're not familiar with TED, T-E-D, I would encourage you to get that way. And if you're looking for a place to start on TED, I would encourage you to watch and listen to Brene Brown's programs she does one on vulnerability and one on shame. And both of those will help you greatly when we begin to talk about emotional intelligence.
You should post them.
I should do that. Sensei, we should do that. Thank you. See how that works? I used to have somebody work for me, and she said, why is it that when we talk on the phone, your to-do list gets really short and mine gets really long? Yeah, I kind of thought you might figure that out after a while. Power of delegation, which we'll talk about. All right. So the ability to stay relevant to a conversation also means not getting defensive. Yeah? Listening to what somebody is saying. Yeah, that's important. All right, so that's just one personal aspect of it. But if we're having a conversation about, let's say we're having a conversation about hotel revenue management. And I ask a question, let's say I ask the question to Connor and I say, Connor, hotel revenue management is unethical. Aspects of it. You know what? Let me just pose that question to you. Hotel revenue management, certain aspects of it are unethical. How do you respond to that?
Are they illegal?
Hotel revenue management is legal except when an emergency has been declared and then it's price gouging.
So anything that's not illegal is therefore ethical.
Well, there you go, Eric. All right. Not everybody agrees with that.
No,
But that's okay. You use it. But is something that's well, let's explore that a little bit because it's important. And we're going to talk about ethics another time. I may have jumped the gun on it. But nevertheless, I want you to reconsider a little bit. Just because something is legal, does that make it ethical?
No. If you have shame, you might be. If you don't have any shame, then you don't have your ethics probably aren't very,
It's a fair point, but that's a little different and potentially not relevant to the first comment that we made, right? Yeah, because what you're talking about now is shame driving ethics. But what we're talking about is the difference between law and ethics. So the fact that shame drives ethics doesn't really have anything to do with the difference between law and ethics, or the congruency of law and ethics. Do you see? It's a perfect example. You come through once again. Very good. So you need to think about relevancy when you're having conversations or when you're doing your research or when you're doing presentations or when you're doing your strategic thinking. Revenue, if we're talking about revenue management in hotels and somebody says, well, and I'm going to get away from ethics for the moment, but let's say, no, let's go back to it. Let's get some other thoughts. Hotel revenue management is not ethical. Let me give you an example of when it's not ethical. You have 100 rooms in your hotel, in my opinion. You guys may see it differently. You have 100 rooms at your hotel. You take 105 guaranteed reservations, right? 100 people show up. So you filled every room. You got revenue for every room. But 5 guests that guaranteed no call, no showed. What do you do with those 5 guests?
Charge them a cancellation or a no-show fee.
Does everybody agree? Does anybody disagree? Christian?
I mean, you wouldn't have the room for them anyway.
Ah, is that a relevant question? Eric, would you have a room for those 5 guests? Any of those 5 if they showed up?
Not at my hotel.
Eric, where did they make a reservation for?
At our hotel.
There you go. Would you have a room for them? There you go. Does that need to be considered before we decide what to do?
Only if the guests would have known that we wouldn't have had a room available for them, would it cause me not to charge them? Because if the guests know, if somebody knows that we're going to charge them for something that we can't offer them, then there would be a conflict. But if there's no conflict, then that's free money. And the purpose of the business is to make money.
But that's not ethical when the public finds out.
Yeah.
But is not ethics a common idea of what acceptable behavior is?
That's not acceptable behavior.
So if something is ethical,
Listen, hold on a second. I think Eric is espousing what most of the industry does. What I'm asking you to think about, is it ethical? And I think so far all the questions that have been asked have been relevant to the question, right? We haven't gotten off track. What would be, for instance, an irrelevant path that we might take in this conversation? You might ask, well, why didn't they cancel? Right? Because that really doesn't have anything to do with what our policy is unless we want to make some exceptions. Who had their hand up? Al? Nope, let me see. Eileen. No.
I feel like that kind of gets unfair because if one night that person came and you had 100 rooms sold and then you don't charge them because you didn't have a room available anyways, and another night they closed and they no-showed and you sold 90 rooms and now they get charged, then they're like, well, why is it like that? So then it's kind of unfair even like guests between guests, like, oh, I got charged that night, oh, I didn't get charged and I didn't show up. Like,
What could you do to avoid that issue?
I mean, like, I was kind of in agreement with that. I think you just got to charge every time. You have to have a consistency across your policies. And that's tricky because, like, when you look at it, it does look unethical. But at the same time, if you start being like, oh, I'll do it this way, that time, all of a sudden people are getting really frustrated because there's not consistency.
So the ethics come from what the purpose was. But because, like what she said, is that conflict is upholding the standard every single time you do it. Now, it can become unethical if the sole purpose is to make money out of every single guest versus taking care of the guest. So I guess the ethics is based off of what your purpose was.
Okay, interesting thought. Yeah, okay. Let me get the very back. It's Chad.
So, yes, if there's a disclaimer ahead of time, like, hey, we're doing this, and we'll put you in a different place. Now, if you call and don't show, you have the policy saying you'll be charged. But if you get overbooked and you walk them, there's that disclaimer already there. And so at that point, I believe that would be ethical. Now, if you don't let them know that, then that's unethical.
So you feel like the disclosure needs to be up front that, hey, we may or may not have a room for you, and if we don't, we're going to walk you.
Yes.
Right? But if you don't call or cancel, we're going to charge you.
Yes.
Okay. Let's keep going. Shay?
I feel like the best thing to do is not to sell more rooms than you have.
The best thing to do is to not overbook. Well, where are my hotel people? How many of you overbook every single day? And when you get the opportunity to overbook, why do we overbook? I love that thought. It's just not very realistic.
Yeah.
But why do we overbook?
People don't show up.
People don't show up. So whose fault is it really? Ours. How many of you think restaurants should take credit cards for reservations and charge for no-shows? Raise your hand. Super fancy, so not Chick-fil-A. Jack in the Box. Like more. But why? Why should they charge?
they're Because you
Third
made
parties
it
are making a table for you.
Yeah, they're holding the table for you, right? And another guest can't get in. And it actually is better for everybody. All right, hold on. Let's go back. Holy moly, I got myself into a real abyss here. We just keep going down and down. But it's good thinking. So you guys are thinking. Does this, let me interject something and see if it changes your perspective. A general principle in the law is that you're not entitled to damages or money unless you suffered damages. So let me put it in perspective. Somebody, you're in your car, and somebody runs a stop sign, and they're going through the intersection because they run the stop sign, and then you go because you think they're going to stop, and then you stop just, and you miss them by about a half an inch. But nothing, not a scratch on the car, you're not injured, you didn't get whiplash or anything, airbags didn't deploy, nothing happened. Are you entitled to damages? No. Why not? Because you didn't suffer any damages. Come back to the hotel.
You're suffering lost profits. When you make a reservation, it's a contract that says I'm going to come to your place and spend this money.
But you're not suffering losses if all your rooms are already fully booked and already committed. So there's 5 extra guests that are coming just because they didn't show up. You're still not suffering any damages because you wouldn't be able to satisfy the contract that you made with them if they did show up.
I think Connor makes a fair point, Eric, and I think yours is the industry, a lot of people in the industry see it your way, but the question is this, because you made a very fair point. It's a contract. But what is the hotel promising under the contract?
To have a room for you.
That's right. And so who?
Or to compensate.
Hold on. It doesn't say that in the contract. That's an industry practice, but we don't say that, as Chaz pointed out. That's not put on the website, right?
Which is why
they don't say that.
Ask for damages.
Hold on. Who really breached the contract first?
The hotel.
Right. So if a hotel breaches first, the guest, there's no longer a contract to be enforced, right? So I'm having trouble understanding the justification for the hotel to charge only in the situation where it's sold out. Do you guys see that?
Yeah.
Let me give it to you in a different context. How many of you work at a hotel in the sales department? Anybody? Nobody? Nobody. Anybody work for meeting planner? Anybody want to do events or meetings? Raise your hand. Okay. So you have a contract. And you guarantee, typically when you're going to have a meeting, you'll guarantee what's known as a room block. And let's say you're going to guarantee 100 room nights for a date. So you guarantee that many room nights. And it says clearly in the contract, if you don't pick up all these nights, you've got to pay us for those rooms. All good? Hotel's counting on 100 room nights. All right. So Caitlin's group comes in, and they only pick up 75 guest rooms. Right? So in that instance, and the hotel didn't sell out, they didn't pick up their 25 guest rooms, Caitlin has to pay for the 25 guest rooms, right? Okay. Now what happens if 2 weeks later, you pay for those 25 guest rooms, and then you find out by looking at the occupancy tax records, right, of the state or the city, the tax collector, that they actually sold out that night. And they sold at a higher rate. Why would a hotel sell at a higher rate than their ADR because of Caitlin's group?
Because they have less, they're guaranteed less.
Yeah, because her group drove their rate, right? It drove their yield because they drove their demand curve. It took so many rooms out of inventory that they were able to charge higher prices. So the hotel collected from you, Caitlin, and then ultimately sold those other 25 rooms at a higher rate. Are you okay with that? Or do you want your money back for your 25 rooms?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it would be frustrating.
Would be frustrating.
It would.
What do we call that in everyday life?
SOL.
Double dipping. Did you say SOL? Eric, we're going to talk about empathy before this semester is over. But it's called double dipping. Here's another principle in the law that I hope you'll walk away with, is that you're only entitled to be made whole. You're not entitled to profit on somebody's breach. The law doesn't enable that. Does it happen? Yes. But it happens because people don't take the time to hold businesses accountable to those principles. So, it's an interesting conversation. While we're on this topic, let's just talk about ethics for just a minute longer. Connor, you got a thought?
Well, it was about the scenario.
Yeah?
Whereas usually with most contracts, there's like a time period, like within like a reasonable time for the 100 rooms to be filled up for the contract. It's not usually just like you have until everyone
The day of.
The day of.
That's right. Usually it's the room block expires on a certain date, and
And
the
then
hotel
you
has
don't
extra
fill it,
days
okay.
to sell the room.
Exactly.
But the question is, do you get credit for the reselling? That's the question when you negotiate those contracts. Fair point. Yeah, but nevertheless, it ultimately ends up at the day of the event how many rooms were sold. It's a fascinating area of the law. It's a fascinating area of hotel business because meetings drive a lot of revenue. And you just got to think about it from all different sides. My experience, though, is that rarely do salespeople understand meeting contracts. That's a problem. But you guys should, I hope. Yeah. Okay. So, back to relevancy. And back to ethics. And so, Eric, you may argue that ethics aren't relevant to contracts.
Within the bounds of the law, it's my personal preference is if there is a law set out to govern the behavior of interactions between hotels and guests, that should be followed before anything else.
Okay?
Whatever is
That's your
left,
decision-making process. You see
whatever is left over, as long as I'm within the bounds of the law,
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want to make money.
Okay. So, let me just ask you a question. If you lose your wallet, would you want somebody to send it back to you? Or are you just SOL?
I would accept the loss of the wallet and hope that someone would send it back to me.
Okay.
I would not expect someone to send it back to me. When I lose my wallet, which I have a RFID chip in my wallet, so I can actually find it. Or like when it fits in Bluetooth range. So it doesn't, and it'll log on Google Maps the last place my phone and my wallet paired. So it doesn't happen often.
Spoken as someone who has lost their wallet before in the past and didn't want it to happen again.
That is also true. So like when I lose it, most of the time I find it myself after a couple days. And then I just didn't want to do that anymore, so I put a tracking chip in it. But I wouldn't expect someone to send it back to me.
When you're seeking, we're going to talk more about ethics, and we'll come back to these conversations. But I found that to be pretty fascinating. I don't know if you guys did, but I enjoyed that. Thank you, Eric, for taking a position and staying with it. It's good, and we'll talk more about ethics and come up with some decision-making processes. But we've got credibility. You want to make sure the information is relevant to the issue at hand. What other things do we want to think about when we think critically about things? What else? Let's shift toward how do we think critically. Yeah, Dave?
One thing I appreciated in one of the definitions I found was that critical thinking involves a lot of objectivity.
Yeah.
So one of the things you have to do is identify your own biases, to be objective. Another thing that you have to do is determine the difference between facts and there was a
Opinions.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was I think value judgments. So
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, opinions, value judgment. You guys know the difference between a news article and an editorial, right? Editorializing is somebody's opinion. News should be factual and objective, right? Yeah. Fiction is somebody's creativity. Nonfiction should be factual and objective. Yeah? Everybody get that? Okay, and I think it was Karina that mentioned journals. What are refereed journals? Are you familiar with that term? If you're thinking about going to graduate school, or scholarly journals, refereed journals. Have any of you searched Google Scholar for information at some point in time? Okay. Those are typically what we call scholarly journals or refereed journals. What does that mean? They're peer reviewed. Courtney's exactly right. So your peers, and it's usually blind reviews, so they don't know the author and you don't know who the reviewers are. They review your work, so they review your thesis, they review your methodology, they review your findings, and they review your conclusions to be sure that it's credible. And only then does it get published. So typically, you can rely upon the credibility of refereed journals because the work has been validated or can be replicated, yeah, or has been replicated to sustain the outcome, to make sure it was in fact true, and then it's pretty reliable, and that's kind of how we test reliability, with statistics after that, right? Well, Sensei, you're very familiar with this concept now. So, those types of resources are pretty good, but just because a think tank issues a paper, does that make it credible? No, not unless the background, the survey methodology, the statistical analysis has all been validated, right? So you've got to be cautious about things today and how you're assessing them. And you have to be able to distinguish between fact and opinion, because it can be tainted by bias. Okay. So if we're thinking about decision making then, how do we use critical thinking in decision making? I gave you one process about a gap analysis. But what types of things would we want to do, Gunnar?
Break the idea or object or
challenge.
Break it down into individual pieces and see how each individual piece works alone, and how each of them interact with each other.
Yeah, how they might work as an aggregate, right? So let's put it into play. If I asked you to write a paper, what would the critical thinking process look like? To break it down, right? And then you've got to put it back together. So the analysis is breaking it down. The synergy is putting it back. But you also have to evaluate, don't you? You've got to evaluate what's important, and you've got to make sure the most important things are in the paper. So if you were going to do a paper, what would be your first step if I gave you a topic?
Analyze each question that you're asking.
Yeah, let's say if I asked you to write a paper on the ethics of hotel revenue management, what would you break down? What would the pieces be? Connor?
Ethics, and then I would break down just ethics in general, then ethics in hospitality, and then I would break down revenue management by itself, and then I'd break down revenue management and hospitality, and then I'd analyze all that, and then synergize it back together by ethics with.
Yeah, you can break those pieces down, but if you look at them in a vacuum, as you pointed out, it's not going to do it, right? You've got to ultimately put them all back together, and that's hard to do. And then, of course, during the course of that process, you have to ask yourself, what's more important? So let me get to this evaluation and priority thing and make it a little personal for you. How many of you use to-do lists? Okay, and how many of you find that your to-do list creates stress for you from time to time? Yeah, you look at your list, and you go, holy, I got to do all this, right? Okay. So, What if you look differently at your to-do list? What if you prioritized your to-do list? And yeah, what if you prioritize by thinking and assessing importance? What if you accomplish the most important things first? Then wouldn't you have plenty of time to do the unimportant things? If you even needed time to do the unimportant things. But what is it? What do we typically do with our time? We typically do the easiest, unimportant things first, which leaves us very little time to focus on the important things. So I think I probably told many of you, Stephen Covey writes a book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and then a second book called First Things First, which is one of the 7 habits. If you're interested in learning about being much more peaceful and productive around your personal organizing, that's a book I would encourage you to. I don't necessarily think you're going to read it all, but I think you might want to read summaries of the different habits and practice some of them, but especially the one around time and organization. He does a very neat, and now I got to see him in person one time. It was really a thrill because I'm a big fan. But he talks about if you have a jar, right? And you have rocks that represent the important things that you want to accomplish. And then you have a sack full of pebbles, smaller stones, that represent all the unimportant things that you do. So let's identify very quickly. What would the categories include in the rock side? Work, things you need to do at work. Family. Significant other. Friends. What about school? Don't leave that out. Yeah, assignments, right? And for some people, it's their spiritual side, right? Or exercise or something. And I encourage you to put yourself in your list. Matter of fact, I would make that first. And I know that sounds a little egocentric, but if you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else. So I encourage you to put yourself. Okay, so those are the rocks. And now over here on the other side, we've got all these pebbles, and what do they represent? They're the unimportant items in our life. What do they represent? What do you guys do that's unimportant? How much time do you guys spend on social? How much time? The average person your age spends 5 hours a day on social. Did you think about that? Average. How many times do you think you look at your cell phone a day? How many? I know you can't, but how many times do you look at your cell phone? How many times? Not how much time. How many times a day do you tap your phone to see if anything's happened? Say it again, Josh. Hundreds. Hundreds. How many hundreds?
275.
Keep going. Keep going. On the average, it's about 800 to 900 times a day people hit their phone. But you don't do it in this class, do you? No. So you get a break. But think about all the time it takes to do that. How many of you are trying to study and you hit your phone? Yeah, you do. See, it disrupts you. It interrupts your flow. And that disrupts what? Your thinking. Because thinking takes quiet and stillness. That's when you have the best thoughts. I'll tell you another time you have great thought. The best time to study is when you're exercising. Yeah? Why is that? Because you pump what? What's happening?
Blood flows faster.
Blood flow, which drives adrenaline, which drives endorphins, which drives more oxygen to your brain, which feeds it, which means it's thinking on all cylinders, and you'll understand and retain much more. So if you're you should run and listen to a podcast, or you should get on a bike and read your notes. Not a bicycle, a stationary bicycle. That would be a relevant question to ask, yes. But I'm serious, that's the best time to study, because that's when thinking happens the greatest time. I totally forgot where I was on that, but that's where we were. What were we talking about before that? 7 habits, thank you. Yeah, first things first. Yeah, all on the rocks. Yeah, that's what it is. And yeah, I said 5 hours, right? What other unimportant things do you guys do? Who reads sports and reads every statistic on the sports page? You do that, Josh. Yeah. And you do that too, Ishan. And why do we do that? It's a distraction, right? And we do it. But could we spend our time a little more productively? Yeah, I mean, unless you're going to be a sports statistician or, or an announcer. But if you are, then that stuff's important. Or if you're going to go on Jeopardy, right? That stuff's important, right? But other than that, it's just kind of a waste. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
But we do it as a distraction to us because we haven't disciplined ourselves to do the most important things first. Normally because we haven't identified what the most important things are, right? And that's called prioritizing or assessing, and that's a big part of critical thinking. Yeah. So here's the thing, though: if I took all those on, well, what's some other stuff you guys do that you screw around and you're not being productive? Netflix, you binge watch a show. Imposters, you do that. What else? What else?
Go out drinking.
You go out and drink, yeah. You go out drinking. Some of that's good. But look, sleep. I mean, take naps. Some of that's important. But here's the thing. So you've got all these unimportant things, and then you pour them into the jar first. Is there any room left to put the rocks in? It's full, right? And you can't, there's no place to put the rocks. But if you pour those out and you start with a clean jar, which is your week, and you take the rocks and you put them in other words, you schedule the most important things, you schedule time to the most important things first. Do you still have room, after you put all your rocks in, do you still have some room to sprinkle in some of the pebbles? You do.
Sometimes.
Yeah, no, you should. Listen, if you will practice that, you will be amazed at how productive you will be and how your stress level will be reduced dramatically. Especially if you're trying to use stickies or to-do lists to schedule your time now. It can really shift your planning and your peacefulness, and it's your productivity. People say to me, there's one guy I'll tell you about. I met him when I was younger, and he had 3 children. He was older, and he had 3 very successful children. He'd been very successful in business, and I said to him, man, where did you find the time to do all these things, to raise your kids, spend time with them, and to do so much at work? And he said, I never played golf. There you go. Golf takes a lot of time, man. A lot of time. But you can play golf and still be productive if you think about this process. Connor, you're not on your phone. And that's what I thought. Good for you. All right. Because look, I'm sharing with you. You'll. Here's the other thing. This is the busiest time you're going to have in your life. How many of you are working and going to school? So what's it going to feel like when you get out of here and all you have to do is work? Stress. It's going to be perfect. You guys are going to, the transition out of school and work just to work can make you crazy. Because you're going to have a lot of free time. And a lot of people don't use it productively. They get themselves in trouble. So that's another reason you want to identify what's important to you. So you schedule important, good, healthy things to do rather than get involved in unhealthy, time-wasting type things that and you look back and go, damn, that batting average really wasn't that important, right? Yeah, just a thought. So I hope you'll think about that. There's a great place online. It's called the Planner Pad. I've talked about it before in some of the other classes. Did anybody get it? The Planner Pad. It's like $30, and it will help you do just what we talked about. It's one of the cheapest planners I found, and it'll help you prioritize and schedule your week and do the most important things first. Covey's program is great, but I found it's very complex. It kind of takes a half a day to plan, and it's about $300. Then I kind of got tired of that. Anyway, just a thought. Because it forces you to think. That's what you want to do. Okay?
My girlfriend actually bought like one of those $30 planners, and it's like it shows you you have like a monthly box at the beginning of each month tab, but then each page is both sides like just your weekday, and then like 2 bucks per weekend. And you can plan your day hour by hour.
Yeah.
And that's what she does. She has all these different tabs where she shows like her actual free time. Instead of just like, oh, I have this stuff to do today, it shows like what time you have to do things.
Yeah, most planners will accomplish some of that, but hers sounds like it helps her to prioritize. And then here's the key, is getting those important things scheduled. Get time set aside for them. Once you've set time aside for those items, you really are like, okay, I feel good, because you know you have time scheduled to get things done. So I hope you'll take advantage of it. I think you'll find it helpful. All right, let's shift gears then, and let's talk about internal interest and external interest. And what we're really talking about here is recognizing that your decisions have consequences for people other than yourselves. Have you figured that out yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you make a decision in a business, who are the internal constituencies or internal interests that you have to think about? And let's get somebody else. Employees, right? That's the first one that comes to mind. Got to think about that. Very good. Shareholders, those are internal or external? It's a fine line. They kind of own the business, but they're also not really there day to day, and so they're kind of external. Yeah? Who else on the internal side? Management is kind of more internal, right? They're getting paid by the company. They're involved in the decision making. Look, I'm not going to hold you to defining precisely internal, external. I just want you to get a feel for it, right? And what we're talking about really are all the different constituencies. So, employees for sure. Management for sure. Shareholders for sure. Who else? Vendors. Lenders. Very good. Who else? Customers. Very good. Who else? Missing a big one. And this is one that most businesses miss. And they miss it at their grave peril.
Non-customers.
Non-customers, potential market, and where?
Assets. Physical assets.
Not so much. Let's stay with human constituents right now. What about the community around you? In our industry, ladies and gentlemen, we're not a manufacturing plant and a warehouse district. We are usually, especially in a place like Houston, in a neighborhood. Right? Do we need to be good neighbors? Do we need to be thinking about our decisions and how it impacts our neighbors? Absolutely. Now, Eric, you might do something that's lawful, but if it disturbs your neighbors, is that the right thing to do?
It increases my revenues. Like if I do something that makes the extended stay American hotel have a negative effect, it doesn't really bother me. If I'm doing what's good for my place and my business, then the businesses next to me, or maybe in my same comp set, or in my area, not
I
really
think
looking out for them.
where you're going at is in regards to community. For instance, our papas every year they go do volunteer food bank, and we get like 800, 900 people there, right? And yes, we're supporting the community, but if you want to shift to a business perspective, at the end of the day, you're doing the word of mouth that papas helps community, that then markets to yourself to get more potential revenue in the future rather than not doing it.
I think that's a great example. It's a great example, thank you. I was also, though, talking about being a good neighbor to the people around you.
We said we were going to talk about empathy. You want to do that today?
I was talking about it the whole class. I was hoping I made more progress, but we didn't. Yes, ma'am.
For example, like I did an internship at Movie Gardens this summer in Galveston, and we're right next to Schlitterbahn. And like if one of us is at a Dippin' Dots, the other will help each other out.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, we're competitors, but it's also very important because they can help you when you're in need. It's really important to have those relationships.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. If you want to open a restaurant in a neighborhood, and it's a residential neighborhood, but you open a restaurant, do you need to think about the congestion that your restaurant is going to bring to that neighborhood?
Yep.
Eric?
As long as I have parking for my guests.
Well, you're gonna overflow parking on the street. You're gonna
Well,
make
then I
it.
don't have enough parking.
Then who doesn't have enough parking? The restaurant? The restaurant? The homeowners? The homeowners. They had plenty of parking until you moved in.
Well, they have driveways for a reason. And as long as they're not blocking a driveway.
What about if they want guests over? They don't have room in their driveway for their guests, and your customers are taking up spots on the street, so their own personal guests can't come. And it is a private residence that your restaurant's in. Exactly.
And that can affect your business, because people will be like, I don't like this place, because it's just so congested.
And if it is a resident, not a good neighbor,
Eric, you stick to your guns. I admire your courage and your perseverance. But we're going to talk more, for sure. Let's look at what we're going to do next time. Don't walk away. You stay with what you got, man. I mean, until you think a little, decide to think a little differently. If you decide. Let's look at where we go next, so we don't run into what we ran into last time. Now, how many of you are familiar with track changes? What? Track changes is a word function. Under review, go to the top toolbar on Word. It says review. You can track your changes.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like for everybody to spend a little time with that before you come into class on Tuesday. So that we can just talk about it, because we're going to use that function with our team papers. Okay? Hold on. How many of you have a Google account? Most everybody. So are you familiar with Drive? Okay, good. We're going to use Google. You can use Google Drive as well, because you can see real-time changes. What I'm trying to demonstrate to you is how many of you will work remotely when you get out of school. And you don't have to meet face-to-face today to be on a team or to work on a team project. And I'm trying to demonstrate to you that you have to start learning today how to collaborate virtually. That's why the cloud is there. And on Google Drive, if Alice and I are working on a paper together, she can make changes and I can see the changes in real time. Or I can make changes and she can see them in real time. That's a good way to collaborate. Right? So I want you to be able to know how to do that before you get out of this class. Yeah? And then how many of you have a Dropbox account? Anybody? How do you archive your information?
Save it on my hard drive.
Save it on your hard drive, probably. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about those types of archival methods just so you understand them a little bit, and a few other tech platforms that might come in handy. Now, we're going to, on Tuesday, there's an article in the reading packet about working in teams. But I'd also like for you, I don't have a discussion post for Tuesday, so you're off the hook. But I do want you to spend time learning about teamwork. First of all, how many of you don't like to work in teams? Raise your hand. All right, you're going to have to get past that. So the research you do is how, because the reason you don't like it probably is because you've had poor experiences with teams. Is that fair? Yeah. So we've got to find a set of solutions that create effective teamwork. Right? So in the reading packet on Blackboard, you'll see an article about effectively working in teams that will help you. But I also want you to go out online and get other insight about how to work with effective teams. We've also established a set of commandments for our teams in the syllabus. So please look at that as well. We'll communicate with each other within 24 hours. We'll give each other at least 2 ways to locate us, right? We're going to do that. And you can also fire your teammate. I'm not going to put up with underperforming and non-performing teammates. And then here's what happens. If you get fired, if Davis gets, not that this was Davis would have, but if Davis got fired and Courtney got fired, again, not that would ever happen, but Davis and Courtney are going to be team. Right? That's the way it works. So you don't want to get fired. All right. So let's, now we're also going to assign the paper topic, and we are going to assign your teams. Now here's what I'd like for you to do. So let's say, let's try to assign the teams, and we'll post it on Blackboard by Monday. Okay? And then you guys, by say 5 o'clock, because you work, I know, because does that give you enough time on Monday?
I'll figure it
Yeah, okay, we'll figure it out. Monday at 5 or so, check and see if your team has been assigned. And these are just 2-people teams for the paper 1. You'll have a separate team for your presentation, right? So this is just paper 1. If you don't know your teammate, when you come into class on Tuesday, everybody put your name badges out and come down here and locate your teammate. Make sense? And if you can't find somebody, then we'll help. We'll make some time at the beginning of class to make sure everybody is attached to their teammate and you can share information. Got it? Because that'll just make the process go smooth. What are you not going to do this weekend?
Drink and drive.
Get out of here. Go have fun. I'll see you later. We have a question in the back. Yes, ma'am.
I'll see you next week.
The discussion post.
I know.
Thank you. Can we please reopen the first discussion post? Can we open back up the first discussion post for this class? It was closed. Oh, when do I want it to close? Why don't you close it? Guys, I'm going to close the post. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to close it again Monday at noon. Does that give you enough time? Monday at noon. Thank you. Yeah? Well, if I see her, I'm going to ask who she is. Very simple, yeah. I'm going to take you.
开条肯定给我的，多少条？开那个口译，没事，肯定给我。对啊，对，选一张，别的人再上一张，但是他能选的课特别少。
Yeah, how are you doing? Questions? What do you got? You're in the right place. I know. This is leadership. What's the note? Is this yours? Oh, that is Preston. It's a recording device. What is that? Yeah.
technology itself scares